Today on Across the Fence, what do we really know about horses in Vermont? The equine industry wants to find out. Good afternoon and thanks for joining us. I'm Judy Simpson. There's a lot of information in Vermont about economic impacts. For example, studies show that the dairy industry contributes more than $2.2 billion to the state's economy. The ski industry contributes more than $700 million, and the maple industry more than $320 million. But when it comes to the equine industry, there's very little economic information. There's no data about the number of horses in the state or about the number of jobs in the industry. Horses do contribute to one of our most prized assets, our working landscape, but to what degree? The equine industry wants answers to these questions, and they need Vermonters' help. To find out more, I'm joined by Christina Rohan. Christina is a faculty member in the University of Vermont's Equine Sciences program. Thanks so much for coming in. So, tell me a little bit about the things that we don't know about horses.
Well, we don't know how many horses are in the state or how many barns there are in the state, and so it's hard to have a sense of what impact they have on our economy, both just backyard farm owners and also what impact different events in the state have.
Mm-hmm. And so what is it that the equine industry wants to know about horses?
We would like to know what impact the caring for the horses, what impact different competitions have on the state if people are coming in to participate in those events. And when they come in, for example, down in Manchester, Vermont, there's the 6 weeks of horse showing that happens every year, and quite a few people come from out of state for that. And so they not only come and spend money on their horses, but they also come and use hotels and Airbnb and recreational
in grocery stores.
And, right. Yeah, buying gas. Yeah.
So how are you proposing to measure this economic growth? I understand there are kind of two different phases.
Right. So the Vermont Horse Council is working with the Center for Rural Studies at the University of Vermont. And the Center for Rural Studies has developed a survey that will be administered. The first survey is being administered to people that are at these competitions. So this week, actually, we'll have volunteers down at Vermont Summer Festival asking people to complete the survey. Mm-hmm. Then we're also targeting the rodeo at Pond Hill in Castleton, mm-hmm. and the Festival of Eventing at the Green Mountain Horse Association later in August, as well as some other smaller venues. Mm-hmm. And so we'll be looking at those people coming from out of state as well as in state, and what sort of, where they're staying, where they're spending their money when they're here.
And we didn't have any idea of how many people we're talking about?
No, no. Right. So, and so there's a group of us that are working on developing these surveys and sort of targeting what information to put together. And so we're from different areas of the horse industry in the state, whether we have one person from the Vermont Morgan Horse Association, we have people from local vet clinics, local businesses, and so we all sort of put in our input as far as what we know is happening in the horse industry in Vermont. So that was how we came up with those places to target. Mm-hmm. And then the second phase will be really looking at every horse owner in the state and trying to figure out and get a handle on how many horses are in the state, how many barns are in the state, what sort of impact having those facilities has on the state.
Tell me a little bit about, for people who don't know, the kinds of industries that are touched by horses in Vermont. I mean, obviously, a barn who's a boarding barn, but what else?
So for each one of those horses that's in that barn, they need to have veterinary care, farrier services. You have to buy your grain and bedding from somebody. Some barns will compost their own manure or spread their own manure, but other ones don't, so there's people that need to come and take that away. Then there's tack shops, so you can buy your equipment that you need. Then the hay that the horses eat. Then there's always work that needs to be done, so there's businesses in the area that help with putting footing in for the rings, or helping with building structures. And then you need trucks and tractors and vehicles like that, and horse trailers. There's all those pieces of equipment as well.
So we're talking about a lot of different businesses that are impacted.
Yes.
And so how much money do you need for this study?
We need about $25,000 to complete both phases of the study.
Mm-hmm. And we talked a little bit about who's part of the collaborative, but assuming that you're able to do both phases of the study, how is that information going to be used once you gather it all?
So the Vermont Horse Council will share that information with the state and people in the state, and it'll be really important for legislators to know about it in terms of passing laws that affect horse barns. It can affect how horse barns are taxed.
Can you give me an example of that? I know we were talking earlier about current use.
Yep. So in the state of Vermont, if you have a farm, then you can get taxed at a different rate if you put that farm into what's called current use. Horse farms fall kind of in the middle, so they are considered businesses and not agriculture. So if you have a horse barn that's used for boarding or lessons or training, then the actual structures are not taxed under current use. They have a higher tax rate. Your pastures and your hay fields can be under current use, whereas if you had like a dairy barn, the structure would count as under current use.
So there are a lot of advantages to the equine industry once all this information is gathered.
Yes. Plus, people can also use the information if they're applying for loans, if they're starting a new business, or they can help with if there's any academic or research efforts that are being made in the state as well.
Anecdotally, what are some of the ways that you think the equine industry impacts Vermont's economy?
Well, I mentioned the Vermont Summer Festival earlier, so there's hundreds of horses that come into the state for that.
And they come from pretty far away.
They do, yep, as far away as Florida, Kentucky. I'm not sure if we get any from the West Coast, but it's possible.
Yeah.
And so they're here for 6 weeks, and so those horses need to eat, and people are staying and spending money to be in the area. The Pond Hill Ranch, those rodeos, I think people come from out of state as well, and so they're coming in and they might be camping, and again, they're buying food and gas, and they'll buy hay while they're here. You certainly can't bring enough hay to feed the horses for all of that time.
Exactly. So how can people get more information or help support these studies?
So you can get more information on the Vermont Horse Council website, which is www.vthorseCouncil.com.
.org. Yeah,
.org.
That's great. Well, listen, thank you so much for coming in and talking about this, and we look forward to having you coming back with the results. That'll be very interesting to find out. All right, well, UVM's popular campus tours are back this summer. More than a dozen university buildings are on the National Register of Historic Places, and those buildings are the focal point of tours that are held every Saturday morning. The tours are free, open to the public, and are led by a retired university professor.
So we're standing here in front of the old mill. This is probably the best well-known building on the campus of the University of Vermont. The building we see here is the second one on this site. The first one was built in 1806 and burned down in 1824. Just by chance, the Congress had at the same time invited General Lafayette to come back over to the U.S. To help celebrate the coming 50th anniversary of the Declaration of Independence. So General Lafayette came to Burlington, as well as many other places in the country, and he laid this cornerstone of Old Mill, and you can still read it, laid by General Lafayette, June 29, 1825. This building, as I said, was the second one. It was expanded in the 1880s by a generous gift of Mr. John Howard, of a well-known family who has contributed a lot to the whole Burlington area. And you'll see his bust right in front of Old Mill. This new building, constructed in 1825, originally had a gold dome. But when it was expanded in the 1880s, down came the dome, the roof was raised, and a big tower was constructed. And that tower, of course, exists today. It's the symbol of the University of Vermont. You see it on signage and letterheads and all over the place. This is one of my favorite buildings. It's the Billings Library Building, completed in 1885. Designed by America's greatest architect at that time, Henry Hobson Richardson. Richardson studied architecture in Paris, France, and fell in love with medieval Romanesque architecture. And you can see that on the facade here. Very simple, powerful look of the Romanesque architecture with the half-circle windows as opposed to the pointed Gothic windows and so on. Coming down from the top, we see a very ornate version of the seal of the university dating back to the 1790s. And then we see two men's faces flanked by lions. Now, oral history tells us that these are portraits of the master wood carver and the master stone worker. And of course, they and their assistants produced the beautiful stonework on the outside, all the carving and so on, as well as the beautiful carved woodwork on the inside. In the apse of the Billings Library Building, we see some beautiful examples of carving that Albert Whittekind and his assistants did. And they're connected with the rafters. If you look at the support of this roof, you'll see that there are 16 rafters coming down, and they split in two as they come down toward those beams. The part that's curving toward the center is coming to rest on some horizontal beams that are called hammerhead beams. And for those of you who have seen the first Harry Potter movie, you'll recognize this from the dining hall sequences of that movie. On the outer faces of each hammerhead beam are beautiful carved geometric leaves and flowers. Each one is different. So we've got 32 very fine carvings of decoration on these hammerhead beams. For me, the most beautiful piece of carving in this building is the fireplace and mantelpiece in this central space, all carved by Albert Whittekind and his assistants out of oak. And you see that there is the portrait of Mr. Frederick Billings on the mantelpiece. Mr. Billings was a native of Vermont, born in the area of Woodstock, and he, of course, is responsible for the very generous gift to the university that permitted the construction of this building in 1885. Probably UVM's most famous graduate was the psychologist philosopher John Dewey. Graduate of the university in 1879, born in Burlington, just a few blocks from the campus. After he obtained his PhD, he did path-breaking research essentially into how people learn, especially children, at the University of Chicago. And he discovered something that we sort of take for granted today, that is learning by doing. John Dewey passed away in 1952. He had been born before the Civil War. So his life spanned pre-Civil War America all the way up to the nuclear age. When the second Mrs. Dewey passed away in 1970, following his wishes as well, her will instructed the executor to ask the University of Vermont if it would like to be their final resting place, which of course is a great honor. And that's why today, just outside the north wall of the Ira Allen Chapel, we have the resting place of the urns of Dr. John Dewey and Mrs. Roberta Dewey, with a very simple memorial stone. The Ira Allen Chapel may be the most dominant building on UVM's campus because of the very tall bell tower. It was a gift of UVM graduate James Wilbur, who was also an amateur historian. He did a lot of work on the life of Ira Allen, published a biography of Ira Allen, donated the funds for the very fine bronze statue of Ira Allen, which is located on the green, and then in the mid-1920s donated this chapel. This building also was designed by America's probably greatest architectural firm at that time, the firm of McKim, Mead, and White. Ira Allen sort of fell into obscurity in the 19th century. The university didn't talk too much about him. Ira had a very colorful life, had a lot of property ownership difficulties. He did donate the land, most of which now constitutes the UVM green in the immediate border. However, he wandered away from Vermont and ended up his life, unfortunately, in dire circumstances in Philadelphia, and is buried in an unmarked grave. He passed away in 1814. Ira did found the University of Vermont de facto, and we'll certainly not forget his name today, in part because we've got this beautiful building reminding us of his accomplishments.
Mentioned the tours are free, but the university does ask that you register online in advance. You can find the registration on the UVM website. That's our program for today. Thanks for joining us. I'm Judy Simpson. I'll see you again next time on Across the Fence.